Our subject is navigating tariffs with Profit 21, a distributor roundtable. A very brief introduction to us before we get started here. I'm one of the co-founders here at Conveyance Solutions, and with me today I've got Val Ross, who's our Director of Application Consulting, Evan, Senior Sales Consultant with me on the revenue side of the business, and Katie Harding, who is our Marketing Director. Conveyance Solutions, we're an Epicor Platinum Partner, and as such, we are work with distributors all across the country exclusively with Profit 21. Everything from implementations to customizations to project rescues to optimizations, audits, you name it. I've got an amazing team of people here in the United States that serve a range of businesses across the country, distributing all kinds of wonderful things. And so the purpose of today is in part to recognize that our realities have been everybody's reality has been really dynamic here over the last few weeks. And in many cases, we're all dealing with a rapidly changing environment. Hopefully it doesn't feel like this picture, but in some ways it probably does, because you've got a rapidly changing environment, lots of uncertainty. There are no perfect solutions, and often we're seeing competing priorities regarding dealing with tariffs. Don't lose money, need an efficient way to do this, need something timely, need to make sure it's right, or I just don't know how to handle it, and where do I go? And there doesn't seem to be a perfect solution. The purpose of today is to give you our best learning and understanding, and we're going to take a roundtable based approach to that rather than a simple, neat, tidy presentation. To that end, we're going to set a few expectations for the day, or the next few minutes rather. So by a roundtable, I want to just recognize that we've worked really hard to understand the best solutions that we're aware of in Profit 21 to handle tariffs. It doesn't mean they're perfect, and it does not mean there are other options. And so we really want to open the floor as much as possible towards the end of this webinar. We're going to try and keep our content short and concise and give lots of opportunities for questions, feedback. And if somebody out there has a better idea or you've done it differently, we want to share the wisdom here today, because we don't have all the answers, because it is those things that's rapidly changing. And the system, there's no perfect solution for this, and people have different priorities, which we'll talk about here in a moment. If we get through this and we find that there's a lot more questions, a lot more content, and we need to run another roundtable, or we'll distribute content via email, we will certainly do as much follow-up as we can to support you as a Profit 21 user group. In terms of interacting with us, there's the chat functionality. You should have access to that. You should be able to add your questions as we go there, and we'll be actively monitoring that. And there should also be the hand raise functionality. Katie's going to be looking after the webinar in the background, so if you need to flag anything along the way, and if you're having some kind of crazy issue that you can't reach anything and you need to email her email is katie@conveyance365.com. Katie, Katie, conveyance365.com, if you need to drop her an email for something that you're just not getting resolved through the normal channels here on this webinar. We also want to acknowledge that the 25.1 release is coming here very shortly. The indications from Epicor is that there are going to be some tariff solutions in that 25.1 release. We're probably a few weeks away from that, and some of you take your releases because you're in the cloud and you take those really quickly. Others are on-prem and you are slow to take releases for varying reasons. So there's a lot of variables there as well, but I just want to acknowledge that there might be some changes for you in the future release. But today we want to really deal with what are we dealing with today in terms of tariffs. And we're going to get into some real technical specifics here in a few moments, but I think the key questions that you want to be asking yourselves is, how accurate do I need my tariff charge for customers to be? It's easy to go, we need it to be accurate. And I think as you walk through the slides with us today in our conversation, that might get questioned a little bit differently or answered a little bit differently. How do you want to recognize the cost? We're going to talk about that really clearly and upfront. It's a significant variable. How much visibility do I want my customers to have? That's a very common question that we're getting a lot. And then I think it's a little bit like related to the first question here. How much manual maintenance do I want to do in probably what is a medium-term horizon of uncertainty and changing conditions? Tariffs are inevitably going to change in this current political environment, and manual maintenance is going to be a burden that I think is going to be on many 21 users here in the coming weeks and months and possibly years. So those are key questions that I think you should be asking in your business if you haven't been asking already. We did a little survey in advance of for people that did register, and we got a great number of responses, which was really helpful. One of the most common questions I'm getting from business owners is, so who else is passing on tariffs? I can confirm that everybody who responded to the survey, you're all passing on tariffs, some shape, form, or another. Nobody said, yeah, no, we're just going to eat that cost or our supplier is paying for it necessarily, and it's invisible to us. Everybody is passing on tariffs, at least in our very unscientific, simple little survey. How do you want to account for that cost increase? The vast majority of you said that you wanted to treat that as a separate GL account versus cost of goods sold. Where do you want visibility for the customer? Majority said basically somewhere. Some said all levels, quote or acknowledgement, invoice. Others just wanted invoice. Some just want quote. And then, and I would say on that quote one, that may be a question of the survey. Maybe you probably want quote and invoice, but quote is obviously important, particularly important for some of you. And then a minority of you said, no, don't want that visible for our customers anywhere. And then finally, when we say visibility, what do we mean by that? What level of visibility? The slight majority wanted a line level visibility for tariff charges. And then slightly less, we're looking for that visibility to be just at the subtotal level on whatever document that was. So those are the key questions. Those are some of the immediate results that we received from our little survey there. And so I'm going to ask Val Ross, who is just an amazing resource in our team, 20 some odd year veteran of working with Profit 21. And if Val doesn't know the answer to anything, I normally know there's probably not an answer. So Val, I'm going to ask you to come on here and walk us through what we try to take a logic tree to help you answer the critical questions that we think you need to answer in your business, and then define the standard alternatives in P21 that can meet those questions. And then I'm going to have Evan get on after Val and talk about some automation possibilities that might be possible for you. And then we're going to speak about edge cases. So if you've got a particular edge case, we're going to talk about assemblies, for example, direct ships. We'll talk about those later. And we'll try and answer those as best you can, get your input and feedback. So be aware that that's coming, but I'm going to ask Val to start with what the standard or system ready ways of handling tariffs could be, dependent on some answers to some key questions.
Okay. So just to reiterate, make sure everyone is on the same page, standard alternatives, we are not considering any customs or add-ons. So this is just baseline P21, some ways we thought about potentially handling this, and then Evan will get into some of the customizations or automations after this. So as we talked about, the first question is, how are we handling costing? And there's two options here. We can either just do an expense against a GL account, or we can do a landed cost, which affects your actual inventory cost, updates the item cost, and then will hit your COGS account. So depending on the answer to this question, you may want to actually build the cost with the COGS option, landed cost. You may want to build the cost into the item that's going to affect your moving average. Some people don't want that, or you don't know how long it's going to impact you, and you want to handle it completely separately. Then that's where the GL expense is probably a better option for you. And then you can either, depending if how you're being billed, but if you're getting charged from your customs or duties, broker, however it's handled, you're going to do a separate expense and you're going to pay them, or you may get charged directly from the supplier. And if that happens, you can add your charges to your actual convert PO to voucher to your voucher when you're paying. So that way, the way we're looking at the cost is either adding it directly to the item or just handling it as an expense. So that is somewhat treated as a separate question to the pricing, which is we're going to get to now. And then the visibility here is the next question. Do I want my customer to actually see the individual tariff amount and as a separate line item, or do I want to bake it into my price? And then I could do it, I wouldn't have it as detailed out on the invoice. So taking the visibility, we want it to be visible option first. We can either do this where you're seeing it in the subtotal, and I think Evan has a screenshot in a few minutes to display this better, but you're seeing it just as a total of your costs, and you're not seeing it as a separate line item on the order. I'm sorry, as your charge, not cost. And then the other option would be to do it as a separate individual line item, and then you can do that line detail. And so some of the pros and cons here we'll get into in a minute, but if we're going to do subtotal, our options there are to do other charge, and you can manually apply another charge like you do any other time to your order. You can also use accessory items, and it can either suggest that you're adding that charge or it can automatically manually populate the charge. And then there's another option with the freight handling charge maintenance setup, and you can have it add a charge, once per shipment, once or each shipment. So you can automate that a little bit more with standard functionality. But regardless of the options here, again, this is just showing at the subtotal level. And then the other factor is that it's only going to go on the first invoice. So if you have multiple shipments, you're going to see that on the first invoice, all the tariffs might get applied to that first. And then the second shipment is not going to have any tariffs because you've pre-billed. So then if you wanted to do it by the line item detail level, then we could potentially look at creating a false inventory item. So it's going to not be set up as another charge. It is set up as an inventory item, probably going to have no cost. And you're going to then have, let's just say 1 million pieces in stock. So you're never going to have to purchase it necessarily, but you would have that item that you can add individually to the order. You can do it again by line, and you can control then how much of the tariff gets added to each shipment. And this can be also handled manually added or added with an accessory item like we talked about with the other charge options. The other thing to consider here is how detailed you want to get. And this is true of both options. You can have multiple other charge items, multiple fake inventory items, or you can try to summarize that and just have one added for the full tariff amount. And then the other option with the line detail, if we have a fake inventory item, you can change the description on those as well. So you can edit that where you can't do that for the other charge items. So if you're editing the description, you can use the same item, put multiple tariff amounts or descriptions on there. Other charge is going to be set up with whatever the item ID is, and that's what's going to display. Okay, let's move to the other option. If you want tariffs that are just invisible to your customer, you're just baking it into your price. You have a couple options here. We can do, well, it's the same option. We're going to end up with a price increase. So we're not breaking that out as a separate item, but you may have your pricing structure set up where you can just add in an additional amount to across the board or to all of your prices and increase it, but you probably are going to have to do some maintenance here where you're grouping items by the different tariff amounts. So you may need to change your pricing structure slightly, even with this option, to get the right amount of tariff applied to each item. I think that covers all of the options here. The other takeaway here, and this is where we're going to jump to Evan in a minute, is that all these are highly manual. So even if you're doing landed cost, which can add to your moving average, add to your inventory cost, and then you're baking that in, and then let's say we don't want tariffs visible to the customer, then you're doing a price increase, so you can do a margin based on that landed cost. All of this is probably going to take a lot of setup. Again, you have to group your items. You probably have different fees that you're going to have to add at different times. So these options are very manual, but there are some ways that we can make it a little less cumbersome.
Thanks, Val. All right, Evan, let's make this let's talk about how it's possible to make this easier. And just before Evan does that, it's not a saying we have a turnkey rule that is going to fix all your problems by any stretch of the imagination. But what we really want to do in this next phase is give you some sort of sense of what might be possible and get some creative thinking going, because to Val's point, this is a manual burden. And as you can see, the P21 is not today doesn't have just a turnkey, simple, solve all your problems kind of tariff functionality. We're using existing functionality to try and meet the needs. And I'm sure you're all struggling with that kind of thing in your businesses today to try and figure out how to get P21 delivering the right outcomes for you in terms of tariffs. So, Evan, let's see if we can talk about some different approaches to this.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So automation options, as Andrew mentioned here, all the solutions you've seen so far are out of the box, baseline, no customizations, no development costs in that sense. It's all the features and functions are there. So we wanted to show you some automation options. This is, more custom development, custom solutioning, and the pro of that is that it's custom, right? It's tailored to your specific needs. You can define some of the logic, and so we're not going to cover all of the different ways that you can add customization, give big whiz-bang solutions. We're just going to show you an example and some of the scenarios so that we can get your wheels turning and you can kind of understand some of the possibilities for making this what looks like a really heavy laden, heavy burden to keep up to date and actually apply these and capture these into something that's a little bit simpler, more streamlined, and more automated. So what we have here is a wireframe kind of solution built out. So you're looking at a screenshot of order entry and a button added to the top pane of that. So this would trigger a business rule, for example. A business rule is an additional add-on module that many P21 users have. It allows you to add some custom code that will, on predefined triggers, will apply certain logic or certain behaviors. In this case, we could do something along the lines of the rule could review associated tariffs. It can find out what that tariff is, whether you have one flat tariff per supplier, or if you have it by item group, or all the way down to even a particular product. You could set a percentage there because we know that tariffs do vary, per item, not just per country. So you can go as granular as you want there. It'll find the percentage, and then it will automatically add a line or multiple lines to the order with the percentage times the extended cost or price of that item. So it takes all of that calculation, entering the item ID, entering the value out of your hands and into a click of a button. You still have to maintain all the variables to get that to show. And so what we've done here is we've added 2 tariff charges. One of them, which is the second line, first line in the red box, is an other charge item. And the next one is that what we called false inventory item, which is a zero cost, uncosted inventory item that we're using to just display the tariff and associate a price with it. If you want to go to the next slide, Andrew. So that automates adding those tariff charges. And then in this particular case that we've seen, you can see how the tariff charge in the bottom right near the subtotal, that is the other charge item. And so Val already mentioned some of the cons of using other charge items. If you have multiple shipments, all of the other charge items are going to end up on this first invoice. You can work around that a little bit by adding them, between each invoice, but that's pretty labor intensive. Then you have the false inventory item, which gives you a bit more flexibility on when you allocate it or when you pick a certain quantity. And so you can have multiple shipments and divide it between that. And another benefit, as Val mentioned, for the false inventory item is if you look at the very bottom of that red block, kind of on the line item that says tariff charges, you can see the item ID that's associated with it, the very last line, the top. So that can be automatically added to the extended description, which is order specific, and it won't impact the line item for other orders. So you have the rule add, 1 tariff charge per item and list the item that's associated with it if you choose to do so. So again, this is just an example of how you can automate that process. It is a custom tool or semi-custom, and so you get to tailor it to your needs, but there are additional costs and modules that you have to buy beyond the out-of-the-box P21.
Thanks, Evan. Again, I wish we could tell you that there was a neat, tidy answer, but hopefully you figured that out. There are no neat, tidy answers, and that kind of goes back to those key questions. How do I want this display? How do I want to handle the cost? How much manual effort do I want to apply? How much effort do I want to put into automation? Those are going to be critical questions in navigating your path through this, and may well be different stakeholders in your businesses have different answers to those questions. So it's certainly a challenge. And today, Profit 21 is we're making the system work to the best of our ability to meet those tariff needs. To that end, what I want to do is pivot here a little bit in the conversation to more of our edge cases, because we recognize there's a few of those. I'm going to have Val and Evan tackle those individually. We'll talk through them. This is the opportunity where I'd love questions. And if you have you've like, man, I've got a great rule that does X, or guys, you haven't even thought about Y as a standard function option in P21. Let's share that information if you don't mind. Again, this is meant to be a learning session for all of us, as there are no perfect solutions here. So if you've figured out something that you think could be really useful to the rest of the almost 60 people on this call, that would be super helpful. So with that, I'm going to move to edge cases, and we'll talk through those. Hopefully that answers some more questions, but please don't hesitate to interrupt us. If you want to speak audibly, just raise your hand, I think is a possibility, or mention it in the chat, and Katie will unmute you and we can have that conversation. So with that, let's move to edge cases. So Val, Evan, what are the implications for assemblies? That's a question that we've seen in terms of tariff management in P21. Which of you would like to tackle that? Val?
Sure. So one thing I guess, to consider upfront is, where is the tariff coming in? So if you're buying an assembled product as complete, it probably has a different rate for that completed item versus buying each of the individual components. So because of that, you really have to factor in adding the tariff at the component level. And if you are using landed cost and building it in, you might have your pricing handle that. Otherwise, you can add other charge items to your assemblies as well. And you could use that same scenario that we talked about with other charge or fake inventory items to tackle those fees. Evan, did you want to add anything else?
No, that's good.
Okay. Let's talk about direct ship. Evan, we talked about this, and for those on the call, we've been talking about this for the last 2 or 3 days, and I've watched Val and Evan wrestle a number of these things out and try and make this simple and as clear as we can. So this is we've been dealing with questions from our customers. So again, this is our best understanding today. So Evan, maybe you could speak to the direct ship question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so direct ships are a little bit trickier because when you receive a direct ship through, convert direct ship to voucher, it's creating both your AP invoice or voucher or receipt and the AR invoice. And so if you have your order and it's displaying a tariff, whether that's via another charge item or a false inventory item or one of those other methods, now you've got to somehow get that to show up on a separate invoice, or just acknowledge the fact that when you receive via convert PO to voucher for the direct ship, when you receive that in, that's going to have its own invoice. Then when you ship yours in, you can have a separate invoice for that tariff associated. What we've found in some of our initial testing is that if you have other charge items, because they end up on the first invoice, there are scenarios where maybe if everything's happens to be a direct ship, where the other charge item will show up on that direct ship invoice. And so you found a way to marry the other charge tariff with the direct ship line. It gets a little more complicated when it's a mixed order where you have some coming from your warehouse, some coming from your direct ship supplier. So you could, there's a couple of workarounds there, but none of them are ideal. It'll all come out, at the end where the tariffs are being charged the correct value and the inventory on the direct ships is being charged. But getting those linked, you could use the other charge item, like I mentioned, or find a workaround where, you fake receive it and then ship it all out together so it's on one invoice, even if that's not matching reality 100%.
Okay, super. Thank you, Evan. No neat and tidy answers there, Evan. Um, and that's what we're all wrestling with here today. So I'm going to just jump to a question from Patty Ann, and Evan and Val, I'm going to put you guys on the spot here. If the quote contains multiple items that may carry different tariff values, how can you segment that on the invoice and the tariff line charges? How will the salesperson quoting know how to assign? So we've got a bit of a process question. I think that second question is more of a process question, and the first one is maybe a little more of a technical question. All right, Val and Evan, you're on the spot
I take
here.
that one. Yeah, it's a spectrum. So if we go from the completely manual process, you have to calculate that. You have to add a line, whether it's a charge or an inventory item for that tariff associated with every line and figure out what the percentage is. If you go all the way to the other side where you have that rule, you would have to have, whether it's at the product level or product group level, some kind of tariff percentage that the rule can look at that you have to maintain so that it can, you can define what that percentage is and add those lines automatically for you. But it's not as easy as just, oh, you change these settings, right? You still have to maintain either the percentages for the tariffs at that product level and build a customization to help facilitate entry so that salespeople don't have to remember that, or you have to do it completely manually.
Val, you wanna edit, correct, augment?
I think this might also tie a little bit into profitability. So I don't want to jump too far into that yet. But no, I agree in general with everything Evan said.
Okay.
And then we do have some other questions in the chat as well, if we're ready for those.
Go for it, Katie.
Steve asks, can other charge items invoice at different times if you use scheduled releases?
That's a good question.
So you definitely can add them to a scheduled release. I have never done that. Evan, have you ever done that?
Adding tariffs to it? No.
No, adding another charge item as a scheduled release. So in theory, it may work, but we would need to test it. So we have to come back to that one.
Interesting idea.
Yeah.
If anybody knows the answer to that question, Stacy Bricado says it looks to say it works. Okay, great.
Awesome.
And something to add to this panel, guys, is as we're going back and forth with all these solutions, we'll follow up. We'll clean up this slide with these additional things that we're finding, like the other charge item and release schedule. So it's a great find that we did not see. So we'll add that to this slide and decision branching tree, and we'll get that out to you guys so that you have an updated deck.
Okay. Katie?
And then we also have Brian asking, can you do something like a trigger button automation, but on purchase orders?
Yes, if you're using business rules, then you can absolutely do that.
Okay.
Awesome. Then we had another one from Matt come in the chat. How do we manage those other charge lines invoicing along with the correct lines in general as well, if there are multiple shipments?
So I think that comes back to so if the release schedule works, you may be able to add it separately or partially to different shipments. And that might be a good solution. That's probably also manual because you're having to set up the scheduled release for every other charge item and match it to the item for the order. So depending on how many items are in your order, that could get cumbersome as well as all the other options we've looked at. So that is a possibility. And then the other option, like Evan said earlier, which again is a little bit messy, but if you didn't add the other charge item in between invoicing and you did your invoice first and then added the other charge item before the next shipment, then that would be another way that you could potentially break it out. And then the fake inventory item, which was our other option that's not using another charge, would allow you to do that. There are some cons to that as well, as you have to ship and or pick and ship those items in the warehouse because now they're treated as actual inventory items, even though you're not physically doing that step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All
right.
right. Go, Katie.
Yeah, we have one from Robert coming in. What are the tax implications around tariff lines on customer orders?
Ooh, another good question.
So I can answer by saying you can, or you can choose to tax or not tax those items. But I don't know the answer of whether tariffs are taxed as well. I don't know if that's the specific question, but as far as P21 goes, you can set your item up and you would change the tax group when you're setting up your item by the location in item maintenance. And then you can choose to exclude taxes for that item or include them if they need to be taxed.
And Val, would that be true regardless of the option that we talked about, OCI? That would be true across the board. A taxable versus non-taxable decision would have to be made.
That is definitely true for all regular items. I assume it works the same for other charge, but I've never tried to tax another charge.
Okay.
And there's similar settings when you're using Avalara, whether you define an item as taxable or non-taxable.
Yeah.
So that is another one, Robert, that we'll run down and double check our understanding there, and we'll do some testing there and confirm the taxable implications, which is a really good point. And then, Evan, to go to your point, do you know how Avalara would treat the items? Evan, were you answering that one because you saw it, or you
Yeah.
just okay? Got it.
You have to know whether it's being taxed or not. Once you figure that out, you can handle that in a similar way as Val mentioned, where you can define whether Avalara will see it as a taxable item or not.
And I just want to make a call out to Philip Hall, Phillips over at gosh, what's your company name these days? Evolution Motion, I think. Philip used to be Womack. Philip's very smart guy and affirming that kind of automation approach that Evan was describing, where they have a process that updates open orders to apply tariffs to them, and then our process stores tariff values in a UD column so we can report on them, and also add line level notes that show up on customer facing documents. We also send out an email that says, sorry, customer, the government raised your price, which is also part of the challenge of communicating this. So Philip at Womack, thank you for that and affirming that sort of automation-based approach that we talked about.
Yeah, and to add to that a little bit, what we've heard of some customers doing is, immediately, as soon as you can, adding some verbiage to your invoices, quotes, acknowledgments, adding to your terms and conditions, just saying, tariffs are here, right? Subject to change, tariffs can be added, just to make it aware and have that awareness out there, even if you're not planning on doing it immediately and you don't have a solution for it yet.
Thank you, Philip. Evolution, I see your secondary comment there. Evolution, it is. So let's just go there. So I think one of the things that we're talking about here is the level of maintenance and variability in the market, right? Or both in the product and then in the broader economic environment is creating lots of uncertainty and lots of change. An alternative here on the screen is a flat charge. And maybe Val or Evan, you could speak to that. It's a very blunt object approach. So you say, you know what, we're not going to try and track every tariff percentage that's changing from what country, what supplier. We're just going to handle this with a flat charge. Val or Evan, one of you want to take that, how you would do that?
Sure. So you would figure out, if anyone's familiar with landed cost, I think people do this already on the costing side, but you would figure out what's your average. So try to figure out what you could apply against all items that would just be that flat fee. You add it once per order, and you you could have that going to different revenue account, for instance. So then you could track how much I'm recovering versus what my actual tariff cost is and see where you are. And you can adjust those as you go. We added in the caveat, like you could do this by order. So you could choose the charge for every item, regardless of where it's coming from. You may want to get down to customer supplier level just because of different percentages. But again, we're looking at this to quickly and easily set something up where you're covering some of the tariff charges, which may or may not be 100% accurate to what you're actually getting billed, but it's allowing you to quickly, without all of that extra maintenance, add something to the order.
Mm-hmm.
And you could do that again if we were looking at automation. We could have a business rule at a certain percentage. If it's a flat fee, you could just set that up without business rules, because you could set that as the price for the other charge item, have it pull into the order.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the most simplistic approach if you wanted to just get something on and start charging immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah, and out of the
100%.
box, freight and handling charges can apply a percentage of the order to every shipment or every order. And that's out of the box functionality. Pretty easy to set up.
Yeah, 100%. And I wouldn't be ashamed of taking that option as a distributor in this environment right now. If you just need to get it solved in some way, shape, form, or another, that is a more than viable approach. And I don't think you should. It's easy kind of to go, oh, we're getting a tariff, we have to charge a tariff, we have to recover a tariff, and follow that sort of mental model. I think be flexible and think about the real implications for your business in terms of how important is accuracy versus not versus a general approach. You may find that that's actually the most cost-effective approach for your business versus trying to get everything exactly down to the dollar based on all the variables that are happening here in tariffs at the moment. Val, Katie, do you have any other questions or things that we need to pause on?
No, we're all caught up in the chat, but if you have any additional questions, please either chat them at us or use the question and answer in Zoom.
One of the questions that I know we have, I don't think we've addressed yet, is what about pre-tariff inventory to be sold? Val, Evan, if we haven't covered that, could you cover that approach, please?
Sure, I can take that one.
Sure.
Yeah, so if on Monday there were no tariffs and on Friday now you've got 140% tariffs, all of a sudden your inventory replacement cost is significantly more. So you kind of have a choice at that point, whether you know, maintain your current margin with your current inventory and try to sell as much of it as you can at that current rate because it's more competitive, or you try and, you know, recoup, add some buffer to your margin by applying tariff, whether that's by increasing price or adding a charge. You try to apply the tariff logic to your current inventory. So you bought it at a cheaper rate. It's worth more replacement now. Do you want to try and get some extra margin on that because it is more expensive if you were to buy it today? So you kind of have a decision to make there, and maybe it's somewhere in the middle. But we've had people go both directions where they just want to sell off as much of their inventory as they can at current rates and use that increased volume, kind of buffer, hopefully tariffs, you know, ease out, negotiations continue, or you try and sell it at an increased margin because replacement cost is so much higher and use that as a buffer for maybe, you know, offering some more incentives later on.
Okay, super. Val, can you speak? You go ahead, Val.
I just add one other thing. So you still want to factor in the cost versus price here. So if you're just adding in the charge to open orders, you can go add your fee to the orders. If you're looking at actually impacting, like let's say you use landed cost, you're wanting to bake that cost in. If it's existing inventory, that's not going to apply. So then you're looking at editing your inventory costs so you can actually manually add in those fees, increase the cost, and then potentially influence the percentage that you're charging on the sales side. There's, again, many factors here, and I think what we're finding is it's going to depend on your choices, your company, your solution, what you want to achieve, and you might use bits and pieces of all of these to get what you need.
100%. And Val, can you speak a little bit to the profitability and commission implications? We can't get too specific here, but I think it's more a flag.
Yeah. The only thing, I mean, just to summarize this, so if you're paying commissions on order margin, let's say, or even item margin, depending on how you're baking in it, well, if you're baking in or you're adding the charge separately, you may add the charge where there's no cost to it. So showing a 100% margin. So then do we want to take those off? Maybe we're not paying commissions on those items, or maybe we want to put in the same amount we're charging as the cost so that the margin is zero and it nets out. So you have a lot of different options, I think, here as well, but you really need to consider that when you pick your solution. Same thing goes with your profitability and reporting. Again, are you looking at this as a whole based on your financial statements, or are you looking at this on your order? Because your order profitability may be skewed if you're not factoring in that cost when you're adding that charge.
Super. Okay, unless there's any other questions or comments, or I'm waiting for the silver bullet to appear in our chat here that somebody has this solved in a way that's clean, simple, and elegant and doesn't require any custom work. I keep waiting for that. I have yet to see it show up, but if you are holding on to that silver bullet, please let us know. Everybody here would be eternally great. Okay, Phil. Philip, a certain individual describes civil disobedience as maybe the option here, which is a fair comment, But and I see Derek has raised his hand. Katie, you want to handle that? There we go. There's Derek.
Yeah, you're free to come off mute there if you like to ask a question. Oh, but we did have another question come in. Derek, if that was an accident. Shabine asks, how about using the eco fees module and relabel eco fees as a tariff? Oh, all good, no problem, Derek.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with the eco fees module.
Eco fee, that's a new one to me too. Okay. If you want to augment that, whoever asked that question, and you've got more insight there, we'd be happy to take that on here. So again, any more questions, we'd be happy to take them. We did try and cover as much as we possibly could in advance, and so the input has been really helpful here today. We've definitely got 2 or 3 points of follow-up that we will make sure goes out, and follow-up will make the recording available to you. Feel free to share that. We are not precious about this information. There is no magic proprietary solution here, as you can see. Rather, we're practitioners like yourselves, actively working on a day-to-day basis. My summary encouragement, I think, would be as you get these questions internally, perhaps return to that slide that we showed earlier on, which was sort of that decision tree type approach, and use that to work through, and then consider the implications at the end of that for profitability reporting, commission, tax. Each of those different options are going to have different implications. And we're also working on a pros and cons kind of table so that you can see those options against different pros and cons, and we'll get that out. We're looking at producing a blog content, some additional content that go on our website in the next few days as well to support that, such that you have an internal guide to help guide the decision making that's going to have to happen in your businesses or is happening today. And maybe that basic decision tree will help you screen out the what ifs, maybes, could be's, what ifs, couldn't something be better than this? And then you can at least say internally that you've done all the research you can and there are no better options. And again, as a reminder, 25.1 may, I would use the word may, mitigate some of these concerns. My personal bias is that I can't see it mitigating everything, but it may provide some simplicity and functionality that we don't have yet available to the user community at the moment. So with that, unless there's any more questions, Katie Harding, no more questions.
We did have one come in from Brian Ackerman. It is a long one. Maybe
Yeah,
I
can take that, Katie.
sounds good.
I won't read through the whole thing, but I think to sum it up, I think what might have been missed, other charge items are not going to be received into your inventory, and they are only going to show up on the customer invoice. They're not going to show up on your purchase order. So the gist of that was that they don't want to receive inventory items that aren't real, and they can't pass that on to their supplier because supplier is not going to be able to validate the PO because they're ordering something that doesn't exist. So other charge items in that case is probably your best option to cover both of those scenarios.
Okay. All
Correct.
right.
You can't put them, sorry, there's a follow-up question. You can't put other charge items on APO. You'd be putting it on the customer order only.
But they can have cost associated with them.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And thank you for somebody that mentioned recognizing this is a hard topic, and I think the response of having to change tactics, that is, I think, something that you all need to be aware of, that tactics might need to change. You might want to start with that really blunt force approach. You might need to start with a sledgehammer, just apply a flat charge, and then maybe move to a more refined approach as you have time capacity. 25.1 comes out to Patty Ann's question. The upcoming release of version 25.1. I have not seen that, Patty Ann, in terms of any pre-release notes. There is a webinar coming out from Epicor. I think it's next week, Evan, regarding 25.1 release. I think it might be Tuesday.
It's up. I think it's on Wednesday, or no,
Next Wednesday. So
there's
Epicor.
two actually, but yes, it's either on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, I think there's one for how to do an upgrade, and I think Wednesday is actually the 25.1 release update. So that is happening on next Wednesday. If you're an Epicor customer, you should have received a notification about that. We will put the link in the follow-up email in case you missed it. In their publicity for that webinar, they haven't noted specifically that they're dealing with tariffs. That is something that Evan and I, in a lot of our interaction with Epicor, have seen in the background, that there is supposedly a release coming there, but I have not seen any specifics about what that is. Evan, is that a fair summary?
Yeah, their formal statement last week was, we're working on it and hoping to release it in that version, but there's no details on how they're doing it, what that will look like, if it'll even be on this webinar.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we're 45 minutes plus through here. So as again, thank you all for attending. I know you're all busy folks. Hopefully this was helpful in giving you a path to navigate by and giving you some milestones that you can measure yourself against, and some really good questions. Hopefully we've dealt some with use cases, and then we will again follow up with a recording, additional details that we didn't cover today, such as tax, and scheduled OCIs on a scheduled release type format. Those are two that jump to my mind that we'll follow up on. Look for more content. And if we can help anybody, if you need further conversation, I'm going to put our next slide up, our final slide, which has our individual email addresses on it. So if you need to reach out to any of us and have a conversation about any of this, feel free to do so. And we'll do our best to be as helpful and responsive as we can, and share our knowledge as best we can. So thank you again for attending, and have a good rest of your day, and good luck with those tariffs.